This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodette. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godette.
Joe Godette.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godette.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
We have been super baseball heavy here on Play-by-Playcast over the last couple of weeks. I'm totally okay with that. I've really enjoyed our baseball conversations. But from a point of personal perspective, we are barreling toward the start of college football season, and that is where we will head on today's episode of PXPcast. Welcome back in, everybody. My name is Joel Godette, the television and radio voice of the Ball State University Cardinals. If you want to get in touch, you always can do that on Twitter. We are at PXPcast. I am at Joel Godette, JoelGodett, or you can hit me up via email as well, jgodett@bsu.edu. Things are getting crazy right now. It is 7:30 on Wednesday night as I record this, recording the Open a couple of days early this week. I'm still sitting in my office here in Muncie. I'm about to get a workout in and then go shoot some video of a preseason ritual our women's soccer team does. Our soccer team. We don't have a men's team. That our soccer team does, where they write down some season goals, put them in lanterns, so to speak, and release them off into the night sky. Just to kind of let their dreams fly and basically catch them on the other end. Just kind of a neat thing to show about what our teams do, and I don't know if humanize is the right word, but just give you a different perspective of going out there, running around, and kicking the ball into the net side of who the team is. So that's what tonight is. Started our video board shoot with our women's volleyball team, was out at football practice today, threw up a story on our defensive backs. I've got a band video shoot next week. We're doing an intro video for the band this year. So lots on the plate, and I'm emceeing my first wedding ever, which I don't know how that's going to go, but that's coming up on Saturday. Hopefully I don't screw it up because I feel like that's an important milestone. But life is crazy right now. That being said, did get the chance to sit down with, I don't want to call him the voice of the West Virginia Mountaineers. He's just the guy that does the games on the radio, Tony Caridi. And you will understand why those last 15 seconds just happened the way they did as we get toward the end of this episode. But Tony is the guy that calls the games on the radio for West Virginia, and he's been such since the late 90s when he took over for the legendary Jack Fleming. And we'll talk all about the influences that Jack had on Tony. If you want more on Jack Fleming, you can go back through the archives of this podcast. I believe episode 9 is Bill Hillgrove, who's the voice of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He talks a lot about the influence and his relationship with Jack Fleming as well, if you want to scroll back in and get a little bit more of a historical perspective. Tony is a guy, though, that, and we'll get into it, is from New York, wound up eventually for the end of his collegiate career at Syracuse. So we'll talk a little bit about WAER and his experiences there, as we've done with some other guys previously. So he will dive into his time at WAER. He'll talk about Jack Fleming. He'll talk about the growth of his professional career in West Virginia. And we'll also end on Bob Huggins. So if you're curious what it's like to be around Huggy Bear, we will get into some Bob Huggins talk as well on this podcast. But we were going to dive right in with where we started today. Life is crazy right now. What's it like for Tony Caridi? What is camp like? What is his prep like? What is lead up to college football season like for Tony Caridi right here on PXPcast?
I think it's a couple of different things. I think it's refreshing where you were when the season ended last year in regard to personnel and those folks that are coming back, and then starting that process of who's moving up on the depth chart and who are the newcomers that could make an impact. I think it's a fun time because I think you just have to be kind of like an octopus, grabbing and clinging on to anything and everything that you can get your hands onto or conversations that you can have to to figure out the direction of where the team is going. And it's fun. I enjoy that aspect of it because ultimately, you're a storyteller, and you got to get all the pieces and all the ingredients and all the characters kind of lined up before you start to tell that story, which you do when the games start to be played.
How much are you, and obviously there's a lot written about a school like West Virginia because you're a Power 5 school. You get a lot of coverage, but how much are you reading? How much are you talking to guys? How much are you going over old notes in terms of reliving kind of past conversations you might have had with some guys to jog your memory?
Very little with old notes. I kind of just start fresh, and to be quite honest with you, I think that I've learned through the years that the most nuggets of gold come from conversations with players and with coaches, because I think that some of the stuff, obviously in game notes and things like that and media guides, they're so promotional in their intent that you're really not going to get the true really good stuff that you're going to be able to use in a broadcast. I mean, stats are stats are stats. You're going to be able to get that stuff. But when you talk to a coach and you put questions to him in perspective, which I kind of like to do. For example, we've got a new offensive coordinator, Jake Spavital. He had been here once before. Now he's back. He left here to go coach Texas A&M, where he coached Johnny Manziel, and then he was at Cal last season with Davis Webb. He had been with Case Keenum before. He'd been with Brandon Whedon before. So he's had like 5 or 6 quarterbacks that have gone on to play in the pros. Yeah. And so you ask him questions like, okay, everyone's different, but let's put this into perspective here. We've got a really good quarterback coming up in Will Grier, who transferred in from Florida. Talk to me about where does he fit in those categories where those guys excel? Where does he need help? That's the stuff you'll never be able to read. Those are the kind of things that kind of give you a background as to what you're dealing with, and also things that you can that use during the broadcast to kind of illuminate where this guy is.
What's the most important question you ask players? I feel like a lot of times this time of year you get a lot of the, what have you worked on? What kind of tweaks did you make? That kind of stuff. And a lot of times you don't get terribly in-depth responses. You get a lot of blanket, try to get better everywhere. What's most important for you when talking to those guys that gives you the things that are gold?
I think questions that begin with what or a question begins with how, those lead to the best answers. I think if you leave them a question where they can give you a yes or a no, that's what you're going to get. And I think you need to ask direct questions. And so I think that, something in the line, they're all going to say this. Every single college football team in the country right now says, we had our best offseason conditioning that we've ever had, and it was the most difficult that we've ever had. And then they say this, and our chemistry is good as it's ever been. Those are the 3 absolutes this time of year. That's fine. So you got to get rid of all that junk, and you got to dive into putting things into perspective for them. Okay. For example, we got a kid that came in a year ago as a junior college player, and what are the biggest differences in your ability to understand this offense today than they were a year ago at this time when you were standing here? What can you do differently that you weren't able to do? Those lead to good answers. Those kind of make them be a little bit more introspective and give you that kind of stuff. So I think questions that start with what and how are always the best.
How do you gear yourself up to call games again? Just get yourself back in that mode. Are you a guy that listens back in the off season, or that listens back when the season starts and tries to kind of get your gears churning and thinking in that regard?
Not enough, but I have recently. My son's getting ready to start his career in play-by-play, and he's got a Division II job, and so we've been going over stuff over the last couple of weeks, and it's very important, I think, because, little things make a big difference, and, you kind of forget because you do so many things once the football season, it rolls right into basketball, as you know, and you kind of forget certain situations. So I do, and I do think that this is a position or a job that you can never, ever think, well, I got it. I think every single broadcast that you do, you can do better. There's never been a perfect broadcast. And I enjoy this more now than I've ever enjoyed it, because I'm looking at it from a different perspective of, now really trying to refine every every specific detail, and I'm happy about that because I don't feel by any stretch that I've got the thing figured out. So to me, it's constantly trying to improve, yet having the knowledge and the ability to know that I've got a wealth of experience. So now I'm kind of fine-tuning, if that makes sense,
Sure.
even after doing this thing for a lot of years.
What's it like, by the way? I was going to bring it up later, but what is it like having a son that is now in this industry and wanting to follow in your footsteps, but also kind of carve his own niche and do it in a state where the last name Caridi is so well known with what you do?
Mind-boggling, to be honest, in this regard. I've got 3 boys, and if someone were to say to me, which of your 3 are going to be going into sports, he would be the 3rd. And if he said 150 words growing up as a kid in a week, that'd be a big week. And when he came to me when he was a senior in high school and said, I want to be a play-by-play guy, I literally said this to him. I said, "No, you do realize you have to talk." And he kind of gave me the look and the smile, and it's been really, really neat because he gravitated toward the sports that I really don't have any experience in. He fell in love with hockey, and that's his number one sport, and soccer. He had a great run this past year because WVU's women's team played for the national championship, and he was able to go all the way through and do the national championship game.
That's cool.
And then baseball. And so he's done those 3 sports, and now he'll go football, basketball. So this is really pretty wild to watch this happen. It's kind of mind-boggling, like I said.
You always think about, like, if I were to have to sit down right now and do long division, I don't know how well it would go. I always remember when you're a kid and you're trying to do your homework and you're like, Dad, come help me with this long division, and like suddenly they have to sit down and figure it out with you. Did you have a moment while he is learning the craft where you kind of sat down and looked at what you do in even a different perspective and kind of went back to the rudimentary levels of it and had something click differently just because of kind of putting on a different pair of glasses?
Your question's unbelievable because it did. And as I said earlier on, I'm enjoying this now more than I have in the past. A year ago, that really started for me, where I really did put it in a different perspective because I was trying to help him when he started doing baseball. He started doing minor league baseball last year. We have a short season single A team here in Morgantown. And so I started to kind of, walk him through the process, and it did make me stop and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what you're trying to do. This is how you're trying to accomplish it. And, use all of those analogies that we use to try to communicate, okay, this is what a play-by-play person is supposed to be doing. This is who you're serving as your audience. This is how you describe this. You do say this, you don't go this way. And yeah, it's made me stop and think about it. And that's kind of rekindled it a little bit for me because thinking about exactly what it is that we're doing, kind of makes it more valuable to me.
I want to come back to where you're at now and kind of your career now in a second, but if we can dive into your development too, back when you were his age, if we can visit WAER for a second. I know you transferred to Syracuse after you started at Geneseo, if I've got that right.
That's right. Yes, known as the hidden Harvard, Joel. Right.
Is it?
We used to say that, but no. It's actually, no, because people always mess with me. They say, wait a second, where'd you go, like a junior college or something? I said, no, it's the State University of New York at Geneseo. And to be quite honest with you, if you look it up now, it's considered, it really is a very good college. Like Tirico always kids about Syracuse. Tirico always says, I don't think I could get into Newhouse again at Syracuse. I'm probably not sure if I could have got into Geneseo again, but yeah, that's where I started off, and then I finished up at Syracuse.
Take me through going to WAER, which people that are not familiar with is the student station there where all your Marvs and your Bob Costases and Mike Tiricos came through. What was it like in the 80s? Just because I feel like that was kind of a golden age of people that came through that station. Who was there with you, and what was it like?
It was absolutely wonderful. So I arrived as a junior, did not know anyone at all at Syracuse, but I had an internship my freshman and sophomore years of college and realized that I needed a stronger challenge in the broadcast realm. And so that's why I transferred out. And so by the time I had gotten to Syracuse, I had finished all my core classes. So it was like straight Newhouse classes and just a very small few other things that I had to finish up. And so for me, I knew I immediately had to engage. So I got involved with campus television station and I got involved with AER. And I remember this, that when they had the organizational meeting to start the school year at AER, there were 60 kids that showed up. So 60 wannabe guys doing play-by-play. And I went like, whoa, this is thick. And so you fill out your little note card, and you went through this long process to be what we would call cleared to be on the air to do games. Like everyone wants to do the games, and so they would filter it out by saying, okay, you have to do a writing shift for a sportscaster, and it was all student run at that time. And you have to go cover, you get assigned a minor sport or an Olympic sport, and you'd have to get pull tape and do all these kinds of things. So there was this like ladder of things that you had to do, and then ultimately you'd go inside the dome, and you would bring a tape recorder in your manila folder, and you would record a game, and you would submit that cassette, dating myself, to the student sports director. They would critique it, and if it was good enough, then you would get cleared to do games. And if it wasn't, then you'd have to go back to the drawing board. So it was a process. And so what happened was those 60 kids, like anything else, attrition takes place, and that list those kids just kind of fall off. And then you get down to the group. And I tell you what, we had an unbelievable, amazing group of guys that were there. For example, Greg Papa, who's now the voice of the Oakland Raiders, was the sports director. And Sean McDonough was the assistant sports director. Danny Horde was a year younger. He was a sophomore when I was a junior. He's now the voice of the Bengals and the Bearcats. Jim Jackson was in that same class with Dan. He's with the Philadelphia Flyers as their TV voice and does some Philly stuff. Rich Cimini was writing for the Daily Orange, the newspaper, and obviously ESPN.com with the Jets. Pete Haskell's WCBS Radio in New York. I mean, there was just Craig Minervini has been down in South Florida for years doing the Marlins and doing the Panthers, and we were all this really super tight group, and we would hang out together, and it was incredibly competitive. Everyone wanted the same thing, and it was fantastic. Billy Roth was a freshman when we were seniors, and he went on, obviously, did Virginia Tech for 25 years, was at UCLA for a season, Hall of Fame guy. So it was an amazing group of guys that were all together at that one time.
What was Sean McDonough like as a college kid and college broadcaster?
Well, I lived with him my senior year. Okay. And absolutely off the chart hilarious. I mean, we had times. So on a typical Sunday, it would not be unusual that we'd all be sitting in a suite in Watson dorm watching football, and you'd have all these Giants and Jets guys, and they'd be screaming, and Sean screaming about the Patriots. And at that time, Bill Parcells was real good. So Sean would walk around, and he'd have these oversized headsets on that we used to have back then, and he'd plug the power cord into his pocket, and he'd walk around doing his Bill Parcells, making the gyrations and the signals, calling the plays in. So it was, I mean, everyone's doing their Marv imitation. Everyone's doing, it was wonderful. It was one of the best times of my life, and a lot of us have stayed very close through the years. As you probably know, Newhouse guys stay together, much to the chagrin, I guess, of the non-Newhouse people in the business, but we stay together, and I think it's a wonderful fraternity.
Did you know then that that group was going to be what it is now?
Well, no, probably not at that level. You had an indication because Greg Papa, when we were seniors, Bill Taft, the legendary writer from Sports Illustrated, was the radio TV guy, wrote a feature story on Greg Papa. He came in to do a thing on AER and heard Greg doing a game, and basically it became a feature for Greg. So he catapulted right into the NBA, and he did the Pacers right out of college. And Sean went and did Ivy League sideline football right off the bat. But obviously, I mean, his name was well established because of his dad in the Boston area. And, while that certainly opened up some doors initially for him, he would never have gotten to where he is if he wasn't incredibly talented. Your name will open a door, but if you're not any good, they'll show you the other side of the door. And so you knew those two guys were going to go, but, like the Dan Hords of the world, I mean, you just don't know where it's going to end up. Jimmy Jackson, went to Utica, New York, and did he did minor league hockey there and did baseball there, and it's a struggle, and you just wait for that opportunity. And I'm thrilled, that all those guys persevered over the years, and everyone's doing really well.
You wind up in West Virginia fairly right out of school, right?
7 weeks after I graduated.
I've read multiple stories where you basically said, I thought I'd be here for 6 months, and here we are in 2017. What was it like for you? And this is probably a loaded question, and there's a lot of different ways to come at it. But I think when people think Tony Caridi now, they associate you so much with West Virginia, not just the state, but also now the university too. What was the process for you of kind of ingraining yourself and becoming this guy and this personality and this voice that now people associate with West Virginia University and in particular, in a lot of ways, West Virginia?
That's a good question. I think that, as I said, when I first got here, the reason I did this was because, number one, I needed a job, and I was doing overnight news right when I graduated from Syracuse, and I'd gotten a letter from Dick Stockton, another Syracuse guy. He had listened to my tape when I was still in school, and kind of offered some suggestion. I remember I still have the letter. It's single-spaced, typed, single-spaced letter, and he said, one of the great things you might want to look at is a college town, because things are happening and things are changing there. And so I get a call for a news job in Morgantown because the news director at the student radio station at Syracuse had known the news director here that was hiring. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go get reps. I'm just going to get experience, because there was a possibility for a little sports along with that news stuff. And I just need repetition, because that's what this business is more than anything else. And so what happened was the company that I came to work for is a very unique radio company in that privately owned, and right at that time they were deciding they wanted to create a statewide news and sports network, satellite delivered, first one in the state. And they said, well, okay, you stay here, you can become the sports director. And what happened, Joel, was that it seemed that at the end of every season there was always another reason to stay. And so 84 and 85, I start to get a little trickle here and there. 86, I start doing some feature work for the Mountaineers Sports Network. At that time, we were broadcasting delay football games, and I worked with Tom Mees, believe it or not, from ESPN. He'd come in, do the play-by-play. I would do color, and then I started to do the play-by-play, and then I was given the opportunity to stay here in Morgantown and freelance, and so I ended up doing what it was then the Mutual College Game of the Week, which then eventually became the Westwood College Football Game of the Week. And so there were always reasons why not to. Well, you don't need to leave; you can still do your stuff. And I started doing syndicated stuff, Atlantic 10 Game of the Week, Big East Game of the Week, and then before you know it, I'm married. Our first child's born in '91. Continued to do the freelance stuff and the Mountaineer Sports Network, and then the legendary voice of the Mountaineers, Jack Fleming, who a lot of people may remember from the Immaculate Reception call. He was also the voice of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jack got sick. And in 96, I started to do most of the games. And in 97, I took over full time. And at that time, my twins were 2 years old. Michael, our oldest, was a little bit older. He was 6 years old. And to me, I looked at it and I said, half my games are going to be at home, and that's a good thing, and from a travel perspective. And so I think, in a long way to answer your question, I think what happened was I just stayed through the course of time. And by hosting a talk show every night, which I've done since 1986, people just feel more and more comfortable with you, so that when the voice of the Mountaineers, after 43 or 44 years, steps down, it was an easier, not a simple, but an easier transition than it would have been had someone just come in out of the blue that they didn't know.
We had Bill Hillgrove on the podcast several weeks ago. He was one of the early guests. He talked a lot about what he learned from a guy like Jack Fleming. How much of a mentor was Jack to you?
Huge. He was great. He was like this. He was like a legendary guy, so that when he would come in the station this time of year to cut the promos for the season, and you're just kind of like, whoa, Jack's coming in. Had this wild career. He was the voice of the Mountaineers back in the 50s when Jerry West and those guys played for a national championship. Then he was the voice of the Chicago Bulls. He had been the voice of the Steelers for many, many years, did all those Super Bowls, their initial run of Super Bowls, did the Immaculate Reception. And so he was a great guy. And so I was the board operator. When he got here, he was still doing the basketball coaches weekly radio show. And so I would be with him, and I'd ask him questions, and I'd show him football formation. I'd say, hey, how do you call this? What would you call this? How would you say this? And he was great about it. And eventually, I'd spot for him a little bit, spotted for him during the national championship game in '88 when West Virginia played Notre Dame and Major Harris at the Fiesta Bowl. So I really learned a lot from him. I learned a ton from him, and more so than just listening, or more so than just dialogue face-to-face, was listening to him do games. He was truly one of the all-time great play-by-play announcers, not from a West Virginia perspective, but if you ask guys, and I've asked, Dick Enberg, and I've asked Musburger, and I've asked these guys, Keith Jackson, they were like, he was one of the all-time greats, and he truly was. He was a great, great announcer.
Did it take you a while to become okay with the fact that, I'm Tony Caridi, voice of the Mountaineers, when, did you ever think to yourself, Jack Fleming's the voice of the Mountaineers, and this is going to take a while?
Yeah, it'll take forever. I don't use the title. They retired the title to him in 1988. 8 years before he finished up his career, they retired voice of the Mountaineers to him. So people are like, well, what are you? Well, I'm just a play-by-play guy, which is totally fine. And it's totally fine. It may have been. I'm not a title guy to begin with, but I really don't. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. And it's a great respect thing for Jack. Truly is, because he was the voice of the Mountaineers when radio meant something different than it does today. That was the black and white era of radio, when there were no television games, when people would go and drive their vehicles to the highest point that they could find so that they could listen to the games. He was their voice. He was their eyes, and he was beloved because of that. And things obviously through technology have changed nowadays. But yeah, I'm totally good with him being the voice of the Mountaineers. I'm really, really happy that I didn't come in 3 or 4 years after he was gone and didn't know him. I'm glad that I got to know him.
You said something interesting in there, where you would show him certain things and say, how would you call this? What kind of things are you talking about, and what kind of conversations are like that?
I was doing high school at the time. High school throws some crazy formations out there, and I'd say, they might throw a wing over here. They'll go with a double wing, or they put a split back. They might go flanker to the left, split end to the right, a tight end, strong right. I wanted to learn his phraseology, out of all that. If the backs are in an I but they're split, are they offset? Offset to the left, I think he would have a riot nowadays with these formations. It's crazy. I mentioned my son earlier. We were watching stuff and we're looking at these formations, and I go dude, if you can call these formations, there's nothing you're going to see that you're not going to be able to call. We're going shotgun now with an I formation off to the side of the quarterback. We're going pistol. We're going power pistol, overloaded to the left, overloaded to the right. And so all these different formations and all these changes, I would run them by him and say, how would you do this? Because I wanted to get, what his thought was after so many years of seeing it, how he would describe certain things.
when it comes to that in particular, and I'm just thinking, where's the need to re-describe things or kind of reset things? If you're going to say the pistol, and obviously something like the pistol is something that is more ingrained with a football person's mind nowadays, but initially when something like that comes out, how many times do you kind of reset what something like that is to be as descriptive as possible, and then when does it kind of become assumed that, all right, this is what people know it is?
That's a great question. It's probably, and the answer is probably not enough. Probably don't do it enough. You say, you just kind of say out of the gun. And so you're assuming that they know what it is that you mean. And then when you say conventional snap from center, you hope that they understand that the quarterback's under the center. But the pistol, I probably do need to say that, a couple times during the course of a game. Pistol formation, that means that the quarterback, is in a shotgun and a running back is X number of yards behind them. Probably need to do that. And then you got to introduce, okay, so what's this power pistol? Well, the power pistol is a power running formation with a running back behind the quarterback with a lead blocker to one side. And then when I go, Dana Holgerson, our coach, he kind of brought in what I call the fully loaded pistol. So it's a diamond. A lot of people call it a diamond. I was never really truly comfortable with the diamond, but so it's a quarterback in a pistol formation with a running back, a lead blocker to his left and a lead blocker to his right. So I call that fully loaded pistol formation. I hope they understand. And there's 4 back there. But you're right. Probably don't do it enough. And as far as recreation goes, it's a good point. I think that was one of Jack's great strengths. Then that's one of the things that I still try to do very much, and that is when there is a significant play, something more than a 2 or a 3 yard run, I will try to recreate exactly what that was to give them a second opportunity to let their mind's eye visualize what happened. And that truly was one of Jack Fleming's greatest attributes, was his ability to do that.
For what it's worth, our coaches call the fully loaded pistol the cone formation.
Yeah, see? Like Dana said to me, well, what do you call it? And he says, diamond. I said, well, it's not diamond. He goes, what do you think it is? I said, well, it's 2 lead backs and a pistol. It's a fully loaded pistol. And I think that's kind of descriptive. So, yeah, you always go back and forth with that stuff. What's
the balance like for you in terms of setting all of that up? And obviously, that's basics and fundamentals of play-by-play, is describe the formation. But at the same time, not falling into a regimented, every time Dwight Wallace, your analyst, stops talking, you just dive right into, here's where the receivers are, here's where the backs are. But what do you do also to comfortably get yourself situated with what the defensive formation looks like? Because I feel like that can be something that too easily can fall by the wayside for a lot of guys. To mix that in, but then also, how comfortable are you straying away from just a ton of description time to time to also tag something that Dwight might say to you, and then again creating that balance so there's not too much of one thing?
Yeah, it's the great intangible, right? There's no specific recipe to say what is the correct balance. And so I think that, Joel, is probably something that comes with experience and goes back to what we were talking about earlier of going back and listening to what you were saying and listening to your games. And I think obviously you're the one that can be the best judge of, I'm not saying it enough, or I'm not giving formation enough, or I need to do this. So I just think it's a repetition, and it's a experience thing where you just get a feel as to when that listener can get by not knowing that exactly that there were 2 receivers between the hash mark and the numbers to the left and 2 to the right in the same formation. I think you can get by once in a while, but I think it's just kind of like this unwritten feel that you get, so that you're trying to let that person at home get it, but not at the same time suffocate them with minutia so that their mind can't process what's happening.
I guess that said, is there a good way to tell stories in a football radio broadcast outside of timeouts and replays?
Not anymore. I think that you used to be able to when they huddled, and at least not here, because it's absolutely it's comical. How fast it goes at times. And we had a game last year. I've been working with Coach Wallace since 2000, so 17 years. And we did a opening possession last season. He didn't say one word, and that was not me being an air hog. It's just that they literally came out and they just, they practiced it all week. They had it scripted all week. They were going to go, and it was as fast as I could say the tackle, and as fast as they could put that ball down. It was gone again. And we looked at each other after the first possession was over, and we took a break. And I said, "You didn't say anything, did you?" He goes, "I didn't say a word." But that's just the nature of the game nowadays, So it is difficult. I spend so much stinking time on my charts, and when you get done with the game and you look at them and you go, "I didn't use anything. Is it worthwhile doing it?" Because I never have changed through all the years as far as my notes and my prep of what I put into those boxes of every single player. And the answer ultimately is yes. It is still extremely important to do it because you just don't know when, that person is going to be involved in a situation. They're down on the field, they're injured, and that's that one opportunity where you could download all of that data that you have about that particular person. And that, I think, gives you credibility to the listener that, you're not going out there and, doing it half butt. You're totally into what it is and you got it. In case you need it, you got it.
What's your interaction with Dwight like? 6 degrees of separation. Dwight is the former head coach here at Ball State and still lives out here in Indiana. So I laughed when I saw him at the golf outing a couple of years ago, and he initially brought up the fact that he knew who you were because he works with you. And we talked about how it all happens and how he doesn't live there and he logs in and watches film remotely and then just meets you at the games. What's communication like with your analyst when you guys physically really don't see each other until the day of the game or the day before the game? Well,
because he is such a wonderful guy, and his personality is so perfect for this. It's like, matter of fact, I just ran into him Monday. He came in because of our preseason radio meeting. It's like we've been together. It's like, we've never left. And so, number one, he's got that type of personality. And then secondly, because of technology, he is able to watch tape at home. We have a conference call on Thursday mornings during the season of everyone involved in the broadcast. We go over storylines, so I know what he's seen and what he's thinking, and our sideline reporter, Jed Drenning, he gives us his take, and everyone kind of gets their words in, and so then he either comes to Morgantown, and we meet on Friday in Morgantown and go over stuff. We spend time in the booth before the broadcast on Saturday and go over, information. If not, then we're on the road. We're doing it at dinner on Friday night, and so it works well. I don't think there'd be a huge difference had he still been living in Morgantown. I met him because, and this probably helps that I knew him, he was Major Harris's quarterbacks coach. He was our assistant head coach at West Virginia during that run for the national championship and was here for several years. And so I knew him. He was a friend. And so when the opportunity came to become the analyst, it was he was a natural at it. How long do those conference calls go? And what else gets discussed? Where we're going to eat, and where we're going to eat. No, they can go anywhere. I mean, they could go 45 minutes. It literally starts. We've been doing it for years. It's kind of like, all right, guys, here's the deal. Here's the travel this week. This is how we're going to get there. Okay, now let's go. Tony, what do you got? And I just kind of give you, here's my deal. Here's what I think this game means. Here's what I think came out of last week's game. Here's where we need to go. Here's the concerns for this week. Here's where we are with injuries. We'll talk a little bit about last week's broadcast. Were there any issues? Were there any bumps that we have to fix? And then everyone just kind of takes their turn. And I think it kind of gives everyone a good perspective. What are we going to have in pregame? Who's doing this? What do we got? And it kind of, the worst thing you could do, man, and this, is put two guys on a microphone and just go fill 5 minutes. That's not good. And so I think if everything is scripted to the point of, in this particular segment, guys, we're going to talk about this and this, that's fine. You don't have to have script of what you're going to talk about, but you're going to have a key topic that you're going to discuss during that period. I think that kind of keeps it live and fresh, but at the same time, it's not like, these wandering guys just trying to fill time to take the next break.
How does that carry over into the actual game itself? And in terms of being able to paint a consistent story arc, obviously that gets detoured when certain things happen in the action, but you're coming into a game saying this, and this are storylines. And I've had games where at the end of it, I'll say like, well, I called the action really well, but I feel like I lost the meaning of the game somewhere in the third quarter.
That's okay. So there you go. So that's what I talked about when I said there's been no such thing as a perfect game, because to me, right, we get lied to all the time, and they tell us that what we're watching on television is reality TV, or actually what reality radio is play-by-play, because you can prepare all week long for something, and coaches kind of take you aside and they'll say, hey, this week this is what we're going to be doing, and then you never see it. That always happens. I mean, football coaches are the greatest liars of all time, and it's not that they lie, it's that they think something's going to be there, and they're ready to do it, and then it doesn't happen. And you go back to them at the end, and you go like, hey, man, I thought you were going to run so-and-so, and they go like, well, you didn't give it to us. So you never know. And to me, that's the fun of it. The fun of it to me is that you just have to figure it out as you're going along. Okay, what is happening in front of my eyes? And when you take a break, you kind of just got to take a breath and go like, okay, what's happening? What's going on? Statistically, what's going on? And I think there's 3 or 4 statistical categories that you can always follow that will kind of give you a very heavy lean as to where the thing is going. And then you tell your story based upon what those numbers are telling you.
I will, one more question. I'll let you go on this note because, I'm over on the time I asked you for, and I know I've got to let you get to work also. But I've asked this question to some people before on the podcast that work with interesting characters as coaches, and I'm curious your impressions and what it is like professionally, and both the joys and challenges of it professionally, of working with Bob Huggins.
So I've worked with a lot of guys. He's absolutely the best. Absolutely, without question, he's the best. When he took the job here 10 years ago, Dan Horde, as I mentioned earlier, was the voice at Cincinnati. And so I called Dan. I said, okay, what's the deal like with Hugs? And he said, buddy, you're going to love him. He's the absolute best. He said, just one thing. I said, what is it? He said, just be ready after every question that you ask for about a 4.5-second pregnant pause where in turn you're waiting and you're saying to yourself, I just may have asked the worst question in the history of radio, but don't be affected by that. He'll give you the answer. And so he's the paradox of what he looks like on the sideline. So he's animated and fired up on the sideline, but the only time he's like that is in a game. And he's to a lesser extent like that in practice. He's like that sometimes in practice. But other than that, when we're traveling, he never gets too high. He never gets too low. He's chilled out. And whenever there's a media situation, as far as I'm concerned, it's been 10 years. It's like, whatever you need, T, got it. Let's do it. Not a problem. And so he's the most accommodating guy I've ever seen. Most of these coaches in basketball now, as you know, they wear 13-piece suits and they stay in their team's locker room until the absolute moment before the game starts, and they come out like Elvis used to come out on stage, like it's this big deal. Hugs is out there 2 hours before a game, just hanging out, sitting in the stands. People come up. He's signing autographs. He's taking pictures. I've seen him sign autographs and pose for pictures when the team literally is in the last 30 seconds of its warm-up before they come to the bench for the anthem. It's no big deal. And so he is, like I said, he's the best to work with, and it's been a great time, great run for him. I'm happy that we've been really good, and we're going to be good again this year. And so he's done great things here. It's been 10 seasons, Final Four, Sweet 16s, Elite Eight, and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun.
It's funny you say that because his niece is our best player here at Ball State on the women's team.
Right.
And I think it was her freshman year. I had reached out to the SID's office at West Virginia, and I said, can we, if I sent you some questions, could I have Coach Huggins answer them on camera, and we'll use them in a video on Mariah. And one of the questions was like, just describe the feeling of watching your niece, because they're close, go out there and not just play basketball, but kind of thrive and excel. And you can hear them on the video asking the question, and he's just got this 4.5 second pregnant pause, and then just very, very almost melancholy answer the question. And it was funny because I went down to our head coach and I told him, I was like, I got this video, and Huggins just seems like he's talking about somebody down the street. And our coach is like, he knows he's talking about his niece, right? And I was like, I think so. But so it was just funny that you said that, because it 100% rings true with the only experience I've had with him.
And I'll tell you, I'll leave you on this. His coaches show, his radio coaches show that we do, it's 2 hours, and we do it at a local establishment here in Morgantown. It's the most, I will go on record, it's the most unique coaches show in the country today. It's like nothing you've ever heard of. As I often say, it's so bad, it's really good. We've got our color analyst, Jay Jacobs, who came in to WVU in the Jerry West recruiting class, so Jay's 79 now, and is absolutely fall down stupid funny, and Hugs just loves doing the show, and it's just locked out, sold out, and it's just a fun time. So it's been a lot of fun.
I'm not going to lie. That one totally caught me out of left field. I did not see that coming. I'm kind of thrilled to learn that Bob Huggins is that kind of guy to deal with. It honestly sounds like a lot of fun, and kind of different of the public persona that he gives off in certain respects. He's got this kind of crusty exterior, but I mean, Tony sounds like he loves working with the guy, and Dan Horde before him as well. I'll have to ask Dan about it. We'll have to get Dan on the podcast at some point coming up here and talk about that as well. I love this convo, though, with Tony Caridi, so I was glad we were able to connect and touch base. And small world that Dwight Wallace is his analyst and the former head coach here at Ball State. Dwight Wallace, as the analyst for West Virginia, comes back most years to the Ball State football golf outing to play in a quartet with a guy named Mark O'Connell, who, when I first got to Ball State, was my radio analyst. It's crazy how this business works out. I guess how life works out sometimes. You want to forget this business. It's just how 6 degrees of separation. That's more like 2 degrees of separation, but it's a small world, isn't it? Anyway, thanks to Tony Caridi. Thanks, as always, to you guys for clicking subscribe and download. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please go rate us and review us. Throw some stars our way on either iTunes or Stitcher. And if you want more episodes, you can scroll through our back catalog as well to find more episodes and other conversations of PXPcast. I don't yet know who we're going to have on the pod next week, so stay tuned. We'll pull one out of a hat and see what comes your way. Hit it, Marshmallow. We are out.